Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Dr. Chad Hart brings us up to speed on the past week and the latest USDA World Supply and Demand Report. How does the war in Ukraine affect the markets? Chad talks about the effects of agriculture on the rest of the world. When will the current weather enter into the market? Will it build pressure on prices? Hear about what to consider as the weather hits the 40s and 50s when it comes to planting windows. Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have a special guest on. We have, as you guys know, Chad Hart. He is an extension economist for Iowa State, and welcome on, Chad.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.
We've had two pretty exciting reports come out in the past 10 days here. Let's go ahead and hear what your thoughts are on last week's report.
Well, as you think about the prospective plantings report, definitely the markets reacted to it because it was different than expectations. We saw 89.5 million acres of corn, which is a good couple of million below the average trade guess that we were going to see on the corn side. All that land seemed to go into soybeans, so the soybean number was larger than the market was anticipating at 91 million acres there. But when you add it all together, the idea is what farmers signaled was that, the higher input costs that we've been talking about all winter long did have an impact on that acreage. I got to admit, I was along with the trade. It surprised me how big a shift that we saw. So you saw corn prices rise significantly afterwards. Soybean took a step back, at least for a day or two, given that acreage number. But then, since then, we've gotten back up on the treadmill and are, continue to see rising prices due to the global issues that we're seeing all across agriculture.
How do you feel Ukraine enters into any of this?
Well, when you think about it, Ukraine figures in just because I one of my favorite maps of all time is basically just a map that shows the soils across the globe. And it shows how productive and how resilient those soils are. And when you stare at that map, what you figure out is that there's only 3 spots across the entire world where they have these highly productive, highly resilient soils that we really rely upon worldwide to help create the large crops that the rest of the world utilizes and eats. And those 3 big spots are here in the central US, down in Brazil and Argentina, why we talk about South America so much, and then the Black Sea region, southern Russia and Ukraine. And so this war is taking out one of those big green spots and putting a lot more pressure on the other 2 to provide enough excess production to feed the world.
With the report, the planning intentions report behind us, you think those numbers are going to come back together? The farmers still have time to make some adjustments? Are they going to make adjustments?
Yeah, there's time to make some adjustments, but we don't often see that big an adjustment here. There are 2 things that could happen. One, we could see more land come into play here. And that was the other fascinating thing to me, I guess I'll say, about the prospective plantings report is that even though we've seen corn prices rise and soybean prices rise and wheat prices rise and cotton prices rise, that when I look at the overall amount of land that's being used for crop production here in the US, it stayed at about 317 million acres. When we look historically, when we get a price rise like we've seen here, we tend to add 1 million or 2 or 3 million more acres to that planting mix. We didn't do that this time. And we also saw this big shift because of input costs. So, those were a couple of sort of startling shifts that we, have no historical parallel that we can point back to. So there's still some adjustment that can be made, but we don't tend to add a lot of land once we set our planting intentions. And then 2, usually the adjustment as we look at what happens between March and June is that we tend to plant a little bit fewer corn acres and we tend to plant more soybean area because Mother Nature sort of forces our hand to.
So the economics still are not bad for corn. Even corn's actually improved. The economics are good for both crops.
They are actually. That's the deal. When we look, we do have very high cost. But you're right that there's still profit margins to be had for both crops. In fact, when I was playing with Iowa State's production cost estimates here earlier this week, you're right that actually the corn margin was still stronger than the soybean margin. But I think it is the concern about the sticker shock of paying for that high fertilizer right now that did scare some folks off, along with, I think, we hear about sporadic shortages within localized areas that my dealer couldn't get a hold of exactly what I was looking to get. And so I think because of that, folks geared down, said, how can I simplify this decision? And soybeans was seen as the easier alternative this year.
Mm-hmm. So what do you, and we've really been talking about corn and soybeans, but what do you think the wheat's going to do here?
Well, with wheat, and what we saw in the report is that there was some movement in spring wheat, but most of it was for durum, which is food related. And, when I think about what the world's really short right now, especially given Ukraine, it's not spring wheat, it's winter wheat. And it's much more about feed as we look at that. Because when you look at Ukraine, 97% of all the wheat that's planted there is winter wheat. A good majority of what Russia produces is winter wheat. That's a crop that would have went in the ground over there last fall, just like our winter wheat is. They're on basically the same, planting windows as we have here. So once we saw the war break out, there wasn't a good opportunity for global agriculture to respond on the winter wheat side. The major producers are all up here in the Northern Hemisphere. They all planted last fall. We can't adjust that acreage to fit this new problem that we face within ag because of the war.
Do you think there's going to be any adjustment in feed rations with the price of wheat going up as much as it is it going to displace any corn?
It's not going to displace corn here in the U.S. If anything, the idea is we're going to still rely upon corn as the main feedstock here. But I think when you're looking worldwide, the idea is that we will see corn being, I'll call it more competitive in the feed rations internationally.
What kind
Here in the U.S., the feed ration is corn dominant. When you look at the rest of the world, actually wheat is a bigger feed grain.
So what kind of tails do you see the wheat market having?
A fairly significant one right now, because when you think about it, like I say, the rest of the world's not able to respond to that winter wheat shortage until we basically get to next fall. So that says those stronger wheat prices are likely going to persist all the way through the summertime. So that is going to influence some choices that we make next fall. And it could be actually influencing some of the planting we're doing right now. How many farmers across the, Kansas, Missouri, into Illinois, Indiana territory are planting some double crop, aspects here where I'm looking at, I plant the corn or beans this year, follow it up with winter wheat this fall.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a huge year for the winter wheat. We'll probably see more acres than we have in a really long time.
The other challenge I'll mention that USDA brought up this week is they just did their first, crop progress report looking at winter wheat conditions. And let's face it, with 30% in the good to excellent range, we know that the crop we have out there right now is struggling due to the drought we still have across most of the western U.S.
So this week USDA come out with the World Supply and Demand Report. Is it a ho-hum, going to make a difference? Get anybody excited?
Well, I'd say, what it did was it sort of said, okay, right now, even though prices have went higher, we still see fairly strong demand. So it was supportive in that way. And when you think about what was probably the biggest number to come out, I would argue it was on the international side, showing that when we look down at South America, we still do see some significant reductions there. They took out another 2 million metric tons out of Brazil. They took out another 1 million out of Paraguay. So we continue to see the global soybean crop shrinking due to the drought down in South America. And so that gave the soybean markets a bit more of a boost as we finished out the report day today.
And see COAB come out with their report that actually lowered it again this week, and USDA kind of gets there eventually.
That's the deal. They're following right along with them. And so, I think back to like 3-4 months ago, I'd be looking at the USDA's world soybean table, and it would have shown global supplies growing this year compared to last year. Now we're shrinking by about 18 million tons. So it's been quite an adjustment over the past 3-4 months.
So with the cool, damp weather that we're having, now we're running 10 to 15 degrees below normal over a lot of the corn growing areas right now. It's supposed to warm up next week, and then we're supposed to have another cool spell after that. When is that going to start entering into this market, or has it already?
I'm going to argue there's probably a little bit in already, but it will continue to build and grow. So if you think about, as you say, the cool, wet conditions we're experiencing here, that is going to raise the specter of planting delays as we look across this crop. And I'm going to argue, especially for corn, if we're only going to plant 89.5 million acres, we really can't afford a lot of delays there. And so I think that will continue to build pressure on prices in the near term.
What should farmers be doing? Thinking about next year, clean the bins out? What's your advice?
Well, I'll put it this way. Right now, the market's been moving in their favor for a while. I understand if you want to just continue to let that play out. But I'm always reminded of when I look at pricing today, for example, and we've got December 22 corn on the board pricing over $7 a bushel. If I do want to put in some price protection, that's an incredible price to be doing it at. So it's an opportunity. There's still upside potential in this market, but at the same time too, if you do make a move, it's probably a pretty good move as far as that profitability as we look longer term for the farm.
When we look at the federal crop insurance price guarantee at $5.90 on corn, and we're over $7 for that same price period, that's an incredible opportunity.
It is an incredible opportunity, and that's the deal. I mean, just think about what we've been through over the past year, especially as I look at both the corn and soybean markets. We produced last year some of the best crops we've ever seen, a 15 billion bushel corn crop, 4.4 billion bushels of soybeans. Yet, as we brought that harvest in, we continue to see prices rise, and we've watched prices rise all winter here into the springtime. And yet we're still staring at, $7 corn on the board, beans well into the teens. It's offering some great opportunities for farmers to lock in some fairly strong prices that are more than enough right now to offset the cost increases that they face this year.
As we look at these prices that, they keep going up, is there going to be a point where, say like the ethanol or the soy diesel that the crush that's coming on board, do those projects maybe start going to the back burner or slow down their pace, or is there, any opportunity, I guess, with fuel being kind of expensive that they hang around and stay in the game?
Well, you hit upon it right there at the end. The idea is that, those markets stay in play as long as energy prices continue to match what we see in our crop prices. I think when you look at the ethanol industry, for example, think back over the past year, what they've watched are their corn prices rise. So their cost of producing ethanol have risen. But as oil prices rose, so did the price for their ethanol. And so they were able to manage that margin and stay in the game. And in fact, when you looked at the report today, USDA had to bump that ethanol usage of corn up 25 million bushels, saying, yeah, we see these higher prices, but energy prices have kept pace enough to allow the biofuel industries to continue to build and grow. And I think that's the major challenge as we look at it for our crop users out there. For the biofuel industry, as long as energy prices remain strong, they can pay these higher prices for the crops. As we look at our livestock industry, we have the same sort of issue there. We need our livestock prices to keep pace with what we're seeing on the crop side. Otherwise, you do tend to see that erosion in usage, that erosion in demand that we do worry about when we get to these really high prices.
I haven't heard any Dr. Doom information today.
All right. If you want that, well, here's what I would say the concern here is that we've watched these prices rise very dramatically over the past 2 years. And there's a lot of uncertainty that has been built into the markets that is leading to some of this price rise. As we resolve some of that uncertainty, it tends to pull down on that price. And what I worry about is that prices can go down even faster than they went up. And so you asked earlier about should a farmer be doing something. One of the reasons I might put a marker in the sand now is that I know where my margin is today. And I do worry that, say that the Ukrainian war does come to some sort of resolution here in short order. And we do see a really good growing season develop this year, we could watch our prices fall off significantly as we look deeper into 2023. I'm always reminded of when the last time we saw the price complex look this good. And that was back in 2012 and 2013. And I think a lot of folks back at that time were thinking we're in a high price environment that we're going to stay here for quite a while. Yet how long did that last? Well, by 2013, 2014, we were talking about prices half of what they had been just a year before. So I'm always reminded what goes up can and usually does come down again.
What's the date on that?
I'm hoping deep into 23, but we'll see. I mean, I think a lot of this does hinge upon the global situation. Like I say, the Ukrainian war is actually large in terms of its potential impact because of it not only impacting what's happening in the markets today, but really how do we set up in terms of global supplies as we move through the next year. Right now, just like we talked about our planting window here, this would be the beginning of the Ukrainian planting window. How much do they get to do? How does the agriculture function around the war in the Black Sea region? And if we can capture at least some potential production there, it does help alleviate a lot of global concern.
I think we would be amiss. I mean, what's the export demand look like right now, Chad, in comparison to what we talked about in January when we had you on last?
Yep. So I would say that, the war definitely has helped turn more international sales back to the U.S. at a time when we don't tend to see a lot of sales. So if you think about this time of the year, this is when we tend to see our export markets really dwindle off because South American production starts to roll in. They're usually cheaper at this time. We lose export sales to them about this time every year. Instead, when I'm looking at the corn and soybean markets, we're maintaining a really good sales pace right now. And like I say, I think a lot of that is due to, one, the drought in South America, but two, the Ukrainian war has limited where folks can get feed grains right now. And so that's helping support the U.S. What's sort of strange right now, though, is that when you look, corn and soybeans have seen a big jump in exports over the past few weeks due to the war, but we're not seeing that in the wheat market. In fact, as you look at the way USDA updated their wheat numbers today, they actually ended up lowering their export forecast for wheat. And so, that's the weird thing about the way the global markets are reacting right now is that they're concentrating on us for feed grains, but not for wheat. For wheat, we're seeing Australia, we're seeing Europe pick up some more sales, but the U.S. is actually losing sales right now because our wheat prices, they've gone up high enough that we're sort of priced out of the export market right now.
All great information. Any other questions for Chad? Well, Chad, we appreciate your time today, and hopefully guys can use some of this information to make some important decisions as we get rolling into the planting season here, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Look forward to seeing you guys in person someday.
Yep.
We'll see you then.
Yep. Thanks, Chad.
Well, thank you, Chad. It's always great information. What else do we want to talk about this week?
That's all I wanted to talk about is the markets and the weather. So,
what are questions we're getting this time of year, Lynn?
Well, related to the weather a little bit, I've had guys ask, what can I do as far as planting goes when we're getting a little bit antsy, I guess, with wanting to get planters out in the field. And what do I look for as far as when to plant beans, when to plant corn? Would it maybe be prudent for me this year to go and do beans first if the weather's looking like it's going to be a continuation of what it was? So, the biggest thing that I talk about is that soil temperature. If we're in that 45 degrees and climbing, if they wanted to get started on beans, we've seen a lot of guys have some pretty good success on early planting in those environments. Corn, I guess we've been bit by it. I just get really hesitant if we're at that 50-degree mark and staying pretty flat. If we look like we're going up, obviously full go on that. So this might be one of the years that we look at if a guy has one planter and he needs to make a decision, possibly looking pretty attractive to get your beans in. But the caveat is once it's ready for corn, be able to get your corn in the ground as fast as you can and then finish back up with beans. I think we got a pretty good window at the end of April, maybe the beginning of May. And last year we've had some people that did that. And in our area, in Area 17, we had a 3-day window for corn. So just go under the expectation that you've got a very minimum window on corn and then just work on beans as either the time works out or you're waiting for the weather conditions to get to that real optimum level for corn.
Right, because we're looking at that, 15-day weather outlook that you're looking at, and you're still seeing stuff in the mid-50s and lows in the upper 30s, even stretching that far out. So that is weather that has that fluctuation in temperature is much more of a bean style weather, in my opinion, than what corn is at this point.
Yeah, I think, like I said, a couple years ago, it was so attractive to go in and get the beans done and go to corn. And last year it looked like we were traveling in that same route, but we caught a window where corn did really, really well because we got that window. And just be cognizant of that and knowing when your ideal conditions for corn is and making sure you're taking care of that, because we can overcome a lot with beans later in the season. On corn, we've got to be on our A game at the beginning.
It looks like that last week of April is going to be a prime time as the temperatures and the weather, according to the weather forecast right now, as the temperatures start making their change to a warmer trend, that would be the time. Make sure that you're ready to go.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. So we got a corny joke for the week?
I don't have one. One of you guys is going to have to come up with it.
You got one? Is it going to make Joe proud? It's got to make Joe proud.
Okay, here it goes. Why do fathers take an extra pair of socks when they go golfing?
No idea.
In case they get a hole-in-one.
Yeah.
I think Joe would be proud of that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think he'd be very proud. So thank you for staying tuned this week, even through Lynn's corny joke. And we'll see you next week. Make sure to subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and you can watch us on podcasts as well. We will see you next week. Thank you all.